Hello, this is Kelly Filgo, and this is my project for the Campus History Project. This is a story about the Aggie bonfire collapse on November 18 of 1999. First, just going to tell you a little bit about Texas A&M University. It's located in College Station, Texas. It's often called TAMU, or A&M for short. Affectionately known as Aggie Land by students and alumni all over the world. And as of fall of 2017, there were a total of 68,825 students. So it's one of the largest universities around. It's a R1 research university as well. So it's a top-tier school. As Thielen notes in her textbook, all colleges and universities use traditions to evoke loyalty and a sense of history. Very few schools are as devoted to traditions as A&M is. As the Aggies say, if you do it twice, it's a tradition. So no tradition at A&M was greater than the Aggie bonfire. It had been going on for 90 years at the time of this accident, and it was probably the top tradition of the entire school. Let's talk about my personal connection to Texas A&M. I attended A&M from the fall of 1986 to May of 1990. There's me in my freshman year, and again into my sophomore year. Didn't go back for any more annual pictures after that. I earned a Bachelor of Environmental Design, and I lived on campus for 2 years where even our dorm had traditions that were specific to the residents there. Even our floor had its own traditions. So, like I said before, it's very pervasive with the traditions on campus. So to this day, I'm still very proud to call myself a former student. And by the way, never call an Aggie an ex-Aggie. Once an Aggie, always an Aggie. Let's talk a little bit about bonfire. So the size of bonfire is difficult to grasp if you've never been to one. This picture shows, I'm not sure what year it is, the archives didn't say, but it's about 70 feet tall on average. Although the tallest one ever built reached 108 feet tall. So add another half again to that stack, and that's just an immense bonfire. Those little dots are people all the way around that thing. Thousands of students work on its construction, and tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of man hours are invested in its time to construct. Tradition said that if it stood past midnight, we'd beat the University of Texas that year. And it was very common for the ground to still be warm after students returned from Christmas break. I know that from personal experience. I went out just about every year when we got back for spring semester to check, and sure enough, the ground where they'd put dirt over the coals was still hot. So pretty amazing. So I worked stack, is what they call it. You're working stack on the fall of 86 and the fall of 87 when I lived on campus. This picture from the campus archives collection is very typical of folks working there, and much to my surprise, the guy on the far right in this picture was one of my best friends, and I was best man at my first wedding. So I was I was pretty tickled to find a picture of Clark in the archives. I need to send this to him this weekend. Many of the logs took over 50 people to lift and carry into place. They were huge. While the work area could get a little wild, especially late at night, alcohol was not tolerated, and safety was always a big concern. It made sure you were staying safe while you did the job. Now, the best job was working from a trapeze-like bench where you'd be using baling wire to wrap the poles and tie them to the two adjacent poles. You can see the wire hanging off that guy's belt while he's up there tying in the poles. But if you hung around long enough, you'd get your chance, and you felt like you were the king of the world up there. So it was pretty amazing. Nothing felt more authentically Aggie than being a part of building the bonfire and then watching it burn. This next section is about the actual event itself. And honestly, if I try to describe it, it'll come up short, and I'm probably very likely to get choked up about it. This was 9 years after I was a student, and it's been almost 20 years since the event, but it's best told in the voices of people who were there. So the following transcripts are from a article in Texas Monthly Magazine. I'm just going to let it play. So we're supposed to connect the story to a chapter in Thielen's book from the era that the event took place. According to this was in the late 1990s. According to Thielen, the 1990s were a time of lost focus for American colleges, describing that loss as a result of universities being unclear and inarticulate about their primary purposes. So in this way, the bonfire collapse can be seen as a metaphor of this period in the American college story. The bonfire was largely unsupervised other than by students. It was only loosely monitored by school officials. And in the following investigation of the incident, many people reported that over time, safety and sound design had given way to loose repetition of folklore knowledge about how to build the stack. There was no blueprint, only tradition. So kind of a similar approach to colleges was holding sway during the time of increasing public scrutiny over college budgets versus college results. This is when we first started to see pushback from states and federal entities about just where the money was going. And many administrators couldn't articulate why they ran things the way they did. It was just tradition. At the end of the 20th century, many colleges were on the verge of failure because they lost their way and held tightly to tradition for tradition's sake. They lacked the clarity and the ability to self-correct. One report stated that the bonfire collapse occurred in part from a kind of tunnel vision, meaning that the enthusiasm bonfire encouraged was also an obstruction to recognizing its hazards. In other words, it's what everyone loved about it became the thing that blinded them to some systemic problems. And a very similar thing was going on in colleges in the 1990s. So outcomes from the tragedy. Really, in order to understand the impact of the loss of lives, you need to understand how Aggies remember their students who've died. Every month on campus, there's a thing called Silver Taps, where people gather and they remember fellow students, active students who died in that month. And then there's a muster every spring. That's any former student who's passed away in that year can be named. And you hold a candle for them, and when they call the name at roll, I'm going to get choked up here because I've done this myself. When they call their name at roll, you call their name for them. I did that for my grandfather the year he died. He was at Aggie too. Even the Student Center is a memorial to the students who died in war. So it's pretty pervasive, this sense of duty to your fallen fellow students, and I'm sure that stems from the school's history as a military academy. So with over 50,000 students when I was there, now over close to 70,000 students on a campus the size of a small city, student deaths are not uncommon. It's inevitable. And the thing is, the difference is that with the bonfire collapse, it was one of A&M's cherished traditions that killed fellow students instead of just random accident and random chance. So this was really horrifying, and it's still keenly felt nearly 20 years later by students who weren't even alive at the time. The Battalion, which is Texas A&M's student newspaper, just as a sample, specifically mentions bonfire collapse in 8 articles in the spring of 2015, more than 16 years after the event. You're still getting at least a couple of articles a month in the student newspaper about what happened and stories that have followed since then. It's pretty amazing. So bonfire was canceled outright. At the time, they said they were going to cancel it until 2002 and then discuss whether they would bring it back. Some students marched on the president's residence, demanding its return. From what I read, it was a civilized march, but nonetheless, the last time students had marched on the president's residence was when women were first allowed to enroll in 1963. So A&M got over that event, and they seem to be getting over the loss of bonfire. Although by 2009, the school had not allowed for its return. They hadn't officially canceled it forever, but an unofficial bonfire activity had sprung up off campus and was being supported by Aggie alumni. So it is still going on, not nearly as big or as organized as it was before. Some people report that Aggie spirit has suffered without the official bonfire serving as a catalyst. Aggies are well known for saying howdy, introducing themselves, just generally being great to one another for the most part. And standing up during football games, the entire game, and lots of other traditions. And apparently, some of those have slipped in the time since then. But of course, it's such a tragic event. It's kind of hard to come back from and do it again. I would not be surprised if there was never another official Aggie bonfire. And it's truly changed Aggieland forever. All right, thanks for listening. About out of time. Let me give you my references. And you can pause and look at those if you want to. So I'll close it out here with a few seconds to spare. And thank you for your kind attention.